A new romance sets a young woman's heart aflutter.
She seemed very happy.
They were inseparable.
She was just really living her best life.
But a horrible tragedy would stop its beating.
She was shot 13 times.
It's not fair.
It took the life out of me.
Could it be a love triangle gone wrong?
But divorce was on the horizon.
Jealousy has to be looked at. New love, old love, everybody plays a part in this.
Or is the truth even more twisted?
They were planning this for months.
What did she do to deserve this?
Now you're putting a case together for a conspiracy.
That is the worst kind of evil. I just was like, wow, this is really like a movie.
November 28th, 2020. It's Saturday night in Lansdale, Pennsylvania, a peaceful suburb on the outskirts of Philadelphia.
The population is approximately 18,000 people.
Lansdale is an area where a lot of people come to build their families. It's where people go to stay away from violence or crime.
But for one neighborhood, this night will be anything but peaceful.
At 10 o'clock that night, a resident was letting his dog out when he heard what sounded like gunshots.
Racing to the front of his home, he spots one car racing away, and another crashed into a pole.
The car looks like it's been in an accident, but with the gunshots, it's a suspicious situation.
He cautiously approaches the vehicle, where he finds the driver slumped over at the wheel.
She looks unresponsive.
Miss.
Getting no response, he immediately calls 911.
He lets the police know what he heard and what he's seen.
Within minutes, first responders are on the scene.
The car is still running. They reach in, turn the car off, and put it in park.
They find a purse. An ID inside identifies the driver as Ebony Pack.
"30-year-old Ebony Pack grew up surrounded by a loving brood of siblings and cousins.
We had a great childhood. We was all raised as like brothers and sisters. We was very close. When we are around each other, that's our happy place.
Though small in stature, Ebony seemed like she stood 6 feet tall.
She had such a big heart. You could always go to Eb. She was always there for you, like no matter what.
She was everybody's shoulder, everybody's crutch. She was so compassionate.
With these gifts, no one was surprised when after high school, Ebony announced her plans to become a nurse.
That was her goal from the jump. She was going to Holy Family for the nursing program.
But in Ebony's freshman year of college, her life took an unexpected turn.
She got pregnant. She had to drop out of college and raise her daughter.
Along the way, she was fortunate to have the support of her baby's father.
Jeff was cool. He was funny. They was good. You know, every relationship is not perfect, but I never saw any negative things happen with them.
As a mother, Ebony was a natural.
She loved Ava so much. It was like second nature to her because she already nurtured everybody around her.
She just took on it with such grace and like finesse. She was a damn good mother.
But before long, heartbreak struck.
Ava's father went to jail for murder.
He was someone that she thought was going to be around for a very long time. She now has to pick up the pieces while raising a young child.
It was a sad situation for her and her daughter.
But with the support of her family, Ebony pulled through.
She came back home. She went back to school. She became a nurse.
She had a lot of strong Black women around her that uplifted her during this time. In spite of all of the difficulties that she faced, she still had that go-getter spirit.
But Ebony's career wasn't the only big change in her life. She was also spending a lot of time with a new friend named Brittany Norman.
She was always in West Philly with Brittany. And we started to see, like, this isn't regular friendship. And I said, Ebony, are y'all, like, together? And she got quiet for a little bit. And she started crying, and I started crying. And I said, you didn't have to keep that from me. I love you no matter what.
Her acceptance encouraged Ebony to also tell her family.
We were basically raised in church. So I think that added level of that kind of moral compass. So I don't think she necessarily wanted to hide it, but I think she wasn't comfortable outrightly saying it.
But when the relationship was finally out in the open, it was pure joy for Ebony.
Brittany made Ebony happy.
Together, they built a beautiful blended family.
Next thing you know, they're getting married.
It was not too long after they legalized gay marriage.
And they were able to support one another with raising each other's children.
But in early 2020, after 5 happy years together, the couple decided to separate.
It just couldn't work because Eb and Brittany are just totally different people.
But Ebony would have no time to wallow as the COVID pandemic quickly took hold.
She worked on the COVID unit. She thrived at it. She really did. Even when I couldn't touch them, she made them feel like, I'm still in the room with you, you're still a person, and I still love you, and I'm caring for you. She was the best nurse.
When the COVID confinement finally ended, Ebony couldn't wait to jump back into normal life.
Eb was just a different person, but in like a good way.
Her priority was like being happy and having fun.
And a trip to Miami with her nursing colleagues would change her life forever.
They did a private dinner the first time they got there.
She meets a woman named Katrina Randolph.
So why hasn't anyone introduced us before?
I know, right?
They meet, they talk, they get familiar.
Katrina talks about recently getting out of a 3-year relationship with a man.
They find comfort in one another by sharing each other's stories and being supportive and understanding.
Wait, where you been?
Where have you been?
And by the time they came home, Katrina knew she wanted to be with Ebony.
Katrina was saying to her, oh, you're gonna be my girlfriend. I guess like Ebony was not used to being like the one that's like the girly girl, like somebody seeking after. I think it piqued her interest.
And Katrina certainly knew how to woo Ebony.
I got to see her come home with flowers that cost like $200. And I just saw her excited about being like, getting like the princess treatment.
Once the two became a couple, things moved quickly.
They started dating in July. They was already talking about moving in with each other in October. She seemed very happy.
But now, Ebony's life hangs in the balance.
First responders quickly discovered bullet wounds all over her body, including several shots to the chest.
Charlie 20, go ahead and start me at 47 for an unresponsive female with a gunshot wound. Her name is Ebony Pack.
After separating from her wife, Ebony Pack had found love again with a woman named Katrina Randolph.
She was happy.
She was just really living her best life.
Ma'am, are you okay?
But now her life is in jeopardy.
Somebody shot into the vehicle where Ebony was.
There were bullet holes in her body.
While she's raced to the hospital, investigators contact Ebony's family.
Lansdale, the police station, called me, and I'm like, please just tell me if it's bad. And she was like, I can't. I just would say, get to the hospital as soon as you can. So my mom went, and I said, I'll stay here with the kids. Get to the hospital. They like, she has surgery. The doctors come out here and talk to you. in a minute, so my anxiety was more like 100.
Back at the crime scene, detectives have arrived and begun examining evidence.
They note that even though Ebony's vehicle crashed into a pole, there is little damage to it.
That would say it rolled into that position and was not actually driven into that position. There wasn't major impact like somebody was racing or something like that. So that evidence is very important.
There are also 9mm shell casings outside of the vehicle.
The bullets came from outside. They shot into the vehicle.
Though police have little to go on, they don't believe this was a random shooting.
This is not in the inner city.
The reputation of the area is very peaceful and very calm.
Which explains why so many neighbors have begun to gather at the scene.
Lansdale is the kind of place where people are gonna come out and insert themselves into the investigation. This is a see something, say something kind of neighborhood. It is a community of law and order, and they wanna help.
Hey, how you doing?
As does the 911 caller, who's the first witness investigators interview.
The neighbor was outside with their dog when he heard gunshots.
I heard gunshots, so I went to the front of the house, and it was a car that just sped off.
You saw a car? Can you tell us what it looked like?
The man said that he couldn't get a good glimpse of it, but based on the tail light description, it looked like it was a Cadillac.
As investigators make the rounds with other neighbors, this is quickly confirmed.
Another witness confirmed that it was in fact a Cadillac.
It's a lead detectives desperately needed, as their case has just turned into a homicide.
The fact they come out and tell me my daughter was dead. She was shot 13 times. It took the life out of me. Took the life out of me. My mom called me. I just remember hearing her say, they killed her. And I said, what? And she said they killed her. I screamed because I couldn't help it.
By now, investigators have arrived at the hospital, where they meet with Ebony's grief-stricken mother.
Do you know anyone who would want to do something like this?
No, I don't know no one would want to hurt my daughter.
She just didn't understand, like, how this could happen.
Ebony just didn't bother nobody. She never got into altercations. She would never hurt anybody. She would pray for somebody before she do anything.
You're talking about a 30-year-old nurse who's a mother. This is a person that is not leading the kind of lifestyle that would lend to essentially a drive-by shooting.
Do you know anyone who drives a Cadillac?
No, I don't.
But when detectives ask about Ebony's personal life, her mother mentions something that could be important to the case.
Well, she's going through a difficult divorce.
There were problems, there were issues.
Ebony wanted to file for divorce, but Brittany didn't.
You have an estranged wife, which is always a good place to at least begin.
The mother of murder victim Ebony Pack has just told Lansdale detectives that Ebony was going through a difficult divorce.
She wanted to get out, but I don't think Brittany wanted to end her marriage.
Her mother explains that in the beginning, the two women were deeply in love.
She was happy at first.
Her family, however, wasn't.
Nobody really got down with Brittany. Brittany was always so overbearing because we love Ebony that much and because we felt like Ebony loves her, we tolerate her.
To her mother, it seemed Brittany put too much on Ebony's shoulders.
Ebony did everything in the relationship, as far as financially wise. Like, both of y'all are grown women. You know, you can't carry the weight of everything all the time.
To the point where Ebony's mother found Brittany abusive.
It was not physically abusive, but probably mentally abusive.
Brittany just wanted to control Ebony, and Ebony couldn't be herself when she was around.
She wouldn't let Ebony go anywhere by herself. She just had to be there.
To her family's relief, Ebony eventually called it quits.
Ebony had decided to break up and to come back home.
She was tired of being a provider. She was, I guess you could say, over Brittany.
The weight has been lifted off of her and she just felt free.
But Ebony's mother says post-separation, a new point of contention arose between them.
Ebony has a new love in her life.
A woman named Katrina Randolph.
And Brittany didn't like that.
She was calling my mom about who is this girl Ebony's with. She's gonna smack them when she see them.
Which makes investigators suspect this could be a love triangle gone wrong.
Do you think Brittany would be capable of something like this?
At first I didn't, but after this, I'm not sure.
As I talked to the detectives, Brittany became a strong thought.
What about Katrina? Do you know what she thought of Brittany?
I don't know.
But Ebony's mother shares her reservations about Katrina as well.
Her energy was off. She was possessive. I remember Ebony telling me she's not all the way there. Like Katrina chased somebody with a hammer before. That girl got some anger issues.
Under the circumstances, detectives need to speak with both women.
You have to look at both of them. New love, old love.
Well, we're very sorry for your loss, okay? We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Both Brittany and Katrina are potential suspects in this crime.
Police reach Brittany first, and she agrees to come in for an interview first thing the following morning.
Face to face with detectives, Brittany appears devastated by her ex-wife's death.
I can't believe this happened to someone like Eb.
She knew Ebony's character and she knew that she was a good person.
Yet she doesn't deny there were tensions between them.
Brittany makes it very clear that yes, they had problems. Yes, there were arguments, but it wasn't to the point where she was some bitter, jealous ex. She knew about Katrina. She knew Ebony wanted to move on.
I didn't have no problem with them seeing each other.
But Brittany admits there was one thing Ebony was doing that she wasn't okay with.
Sometimes my daughter would be with her and she'd take her to Katrina's house, so we would argue about that.
She openly admitted that she didn't like that and they got into arguments about it. But Brittany was adamant that she didn't have anything to do with this murder.
Well, where were you last night then?
I was with friends.
All right. Well, before we let you go, do you know anyone with a Cadillac?
No, not that I can think of.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming in. If we have any other questions, we will get back to you.
Not long after Brittany leaves the station, Katrina comes in for questioning.
She had already heard from family and friends about Ebony's murder, and she said she was sleepless over it.
And that's when she makes a jaw-dropping revelation.
I think I know who killed her.
Katrina says my ex-boyfriend may have had something to do with this.
Katrina Randolph, the girlfriend of 30-year-old Ebony Pack, has just told Lansdale detectives that she fears her ex-boyfriend may be behind the murder.
And what's your ex's name?
Ling Dan.
Katrina and Ling had a very toxic relationship.
They had dated for 3 years.
She leaned on him for finances.
But when she finally broke things off, he refused to accept it.
He consistently stalked her, showed up to her job, consistently called her.
And discovering she was dating someone else only fanned the flames.
He was not happy about her leaving him, and specifically not happy about her leaving him for another woman.
Which Katrina believes is what triggered his sudden demand for her to return all the money he'd given her.
And how much money are we talking?
Over the years, like 19,000, but I didn't have it all.
She can only give him 10,000.
Not long after, someone broke into her home, and Katrina immediately suspected Ling.
Things that were stolen from her home just so happened to be things that Ling had purchased for her.
Did you report this to the police?
No.
Why not?
She didn't feel like she could because she didn't have any proof that he specifically did it.
Although Katrina admits that wasn't the only reason.
There was a pattern and a history of abuse.
And Katrina says that one night, Ling went too far.
She recalls she's pumping gas in her car one evening.
Ling shows up, gets inside her car where the keys are still in her ignition.
He gets into her purse trying to take money.
Ling, what are you doing? Get.
She gets in the passenger side and confronts him.
Ling, get out my car!
Hell no! Hell no!
To the point that he basically hijacks the car with her in it.
Hell no. I'm taking you, I'm taking this car.
In a panic, she climbs in the back seat and tries to call somebody for help.
Who you calling? Is that Ebony? Better tell your girl to watch her back.
He said he's gonna do something to Ebony if Katrina don't give him his money back.
Eventually, Katrina says Ling gave her a chance to escape.
Ling goes to a store and gets out to go make a purchase. She takes her car back.
Don't move.
Shaken, Katrina knew she had to take action.
She had to take a restraining order out on him.
To detectives, Katrina's theory sounds plausible, but they aren't sure she's telling the whole truth.
She has been described as someone who is controlling. What if she had become angry with Ebony and had harmed her? Could she be using Ling Dan as a scapegoat?
But when pressed, Katrina insists she and Ebony were in a good place.
She makes it very clear that her relationship with Ebony was fine.
And you didn't have any issues with her speaking with her ex-wife?
No. Why would I? I'm the one she wants to be with.
They were in love. They were inseparable.
In fact, she says that she and Ebony were planning to meet the night of the murder.
She said Ebony had called her around 9:30 to let her know she was just 10 minutes from her house. As time passed and Ebony didn't show up, Katrina got worried. She tried to call her and got no response.
But I never ever thought she would be dead.
Before wrapping their interview with Katrina, they ask if Ling drives a Cadillac.
Does he drive a Cadillac?
He doesn't.
And she doesn't know of anyone else who does either.
Detectives know they need to speak with Ling Dan. However, when they try to track him down, it seems he's in the wind.
No one knows where he is.
At the same time, investigators get a potential break in the case.
They are given access to the surveillance records from the toll road that Ebony would have taken to get to Katrina's house that night.
They found a car that followed her through the toll. It was a Cadillac.
Zooming in, investigators discover a Delaware license plate with a dealership name on it.
When they run the plates, they turn out to be fake. But when they contact the dealership, they have better luck.
They were able to confirm that they recently sold a Cadillac of this make and model.
The buyer was a man by the name of Ricky Vance.
Lansdale investigators have traced the Cadillac they believe Ebony Pack's killer drove to a man named Ricky Vance.
He becomes a person of interest.
And after running a background check, he definitely seems capable of this kind of crime.
He served state time for carjackings. He's no stranger to violence.
In fact, he had been in prison for 20 years. He had only been out on parole for a few months.
After hauling Ricky in for questioning,
what's this all about?
Detectives waste no time confronting him.
We have evidence that your car was involved in the murder of a woman named Ebony Pack.
What are you talking about?
We have your car on camera with counterfeit plates.
He immediately confirms that, in fact, the Cadillac is his, but says he'd never put counterfeit plates on it.
He also denies knowing anyone named Ebony.
But that doesn't stop police from digging further for a connection to the crime.
Do you know someone named Ling Dan?
No, ma'am.
What about Katrina Randolph? Does that sound familiar?
Who is that?
And when asked where he was the night of the murder, he claims to have an alibi.
I was in Philly watching a boxing match with friends.
And you had the Cadillac with you in Philadelphia?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you loan it to someone?
No, ma'am.
But the evidence just doesn't support his statements. Several witnesses describe the Cadillac fleeing from the scene.
Ricky's been found lying.
And when investigators look into his alibi, Ricky's caught in yet another lie.
The alibi does not check out.
And the plot only thickens when they receive his phone records.
They quickly find text messages between him and a man named Terrence Marche discussing counterfeit plates.
They also see a series of several calls between Terrence and Ricky on the night Ebony was shot, with a gap of about 3 hours right around the time of the murder.
While the phone records don't prove Ricky was involved, they are enough to get a warrant to search his car.
They find gunshot residue on the passenger seat of the vehicle.
The shots came from the passenger side of the Cadillac and to the driver's side of her vehicle. So we know that at a minimum, 2 people have to be in the Cadillac.
With Ricky stalling, investigators haul in Terrence to see if he'll talk.
Do you know a man named Ricky Vance?
Yeah.
He confirms they have been friends for about 10 years.
He also admits that he has helped Ricky with temporary tags for a car before, but denied ever getting him counterfeit plates.
Okay. And where were you Saturday night?
I was actually home alone on Saturday.
Continuing down the rabbit hole, they ask Terrence if he knows Ebony, Katrina, or Ling Dan.
Nah, no Ebony. But I know Ling, and Katrina was his old girl.
He is known for a healthy portion of time, Mr. Ling.
He also admits to knowing Katrina via Ling, but didn't have much interaction with her personally.
And Ricky knows both of them as well?
Not that I know of.
But detectives suspect Terrence is lying.
They doubt it's a coincidence that Terrence just so happens to be a link between Ricky and Ling Dan. It seems likely that all 3 had something to do with the murder.
And when detectives pull Terrence's and Ling Dan's phone records, they find their smoking gun.
The cell phone data of these 3 men put them at the same spot at 8 p.m. on the night that Ebony Pack was killed.
and they suspect Ling Dan is the mastermind behind the crime.
The theory was that Ling commissioned this hit on Ebony as revenge on Katrina.
He solicited Terrence to be the gunman, who then brought in Ricky to be the driver.
Police believe after finalizing their plans, Ling Dan left the meeting alone.
Cell phone records show his phone heading across state lines into New Jersey.
Meanwhile, Ricky and Terrence turned off their phones.
It was highly suspect that they turned them off for a 3-hour period, right at the time that the murder was taking place.
With probable cause, investigators issue warrants for all 3 suspects' arrests.
At this point, you got enough evidence for conspiracy.
Then they bring Ebony's family up to speed.
They called me. Detectives always made sure that I was in the loop.
The story was so crazy to me. The whole process of hiring 2 men to kill her was just mind-blowing.
That is a deep-rooted evil man.
When Ricky Vance is apprehended, Ebony's family is overjoyed.
Our family did a cookout to celebrate.
But when investigators try to apprehend Terrence Marche, he's nowhere to be found.
Like Ling, Terrence now appears to be on a run too.
Fleeing basically says to any law enforcement agency, you are guilty.
While investigators in Lansdale, Pennsylvania have arrested Ricky Vance in the murder for hire of Ebony Pack, the 2 other suspects, Ling Dan and Terrence Marche, remain at large.
All we could do is pray that they didn't get away with it.
Through it all, investigators refuse to give up on the case.
Montgomery County detectives, they are pretty awesome. Like, they always call me, be patient. We're getting it done. Stuff is happening. They made it their priority to bring justice for Ebony.
And when they track down Terrence's fiancée, they get crucial information on his whereabouts.
Hello?
She had gotten a call from Terrence a few days before.
He's actually in Honduras with Ling.
They done fled the country.
Since then, his fiancée claims she'd lost touch with Terrence, though she had spoken with Ling.
Mr. Ling communicates with her that day Marche's run off.
But he also tells her that he's made a different decision. He's coming back to the U.S. to face charges.
Whether it was his guilt or his confidence that brought him home, police successfully intercept Ling Dan once he's back on U.S. soil.
He is arrested without incident.
Nearly a year later, Terrence Marche is still missing. Nonetheless, the trial of Ling Dan and Ricky Vance moves forward.
Pretty much my whole family were there every day. We showed up for her. We showed them that she was loved.
Face to face with the family, the defendants show their true colors.
Ricky Vance, because he's a loser. I think he was just following behind that man. But Ling, because he's evil, he thought he would just get away with it. Like, he was smiling the whole time with a stupid little smirk on his face. And it's just like, yuck, that man is disgusting.
The prosecution portrays Ling as the conspiracy's mastermind.
Ling hired Terrence to be the shooter, and Terrence hooked Ling up with Ricky as the driver.
A vengeful ex-lover, Ling was motivated by jealousy and dollar signs.
Katrina moved on with Ebony, and he still wanted Katrina, and he also wanted his money.
According to the prosecution, on the night of the murder, Ling, Ricky, and Terrence met up to finalize their plans.
That killing was as a result of the meeting that took place. There was a forethought, there was a plan, so there's first-degree murder.
Afterwards, Ricky and Terrence turned off their phones and followed Ebony to the scene of the crime.
Police showed evidence from the tow of the car owned by Ricky.
They followed Ebony on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, which is also laden with cameras.
And as they followed her through the streets near Katrina's home, they opened fire.
They pulled up beside her and began shooting out the open window of the passenger side of the Cadillac.
She was shot 13 times.
Circumstantial evidence against the men is damning.
All the men were in the same place prior to the murder.
Not to mention Ling had fled to Honduras with Terrence.
But when it's the defense's turn, they place the blame on missing suspect Terrence Marche.
On the stand, Ricky changes his story.
He now comes forward with this theory that Marche took my car. He was acting weird. He was acting funny. He took my vehicle and came back and looked very distraught.
But on cross-examination, the prosecution rebounds with a different theory.
The only person who could essentially tell on both Ling and Vance was Terrence. So they wanted to be able to put all of this on him.
So they convinced him to go to Honduras, and then he's never heard from again.
After getting rid of Terrence, Ling comes back from Honduras. Now he and Ricky Vance can go to trial together and take the position they had absolutely nothing to do with this crime.
But the jury doesn't buy their story, convicting them of first-degree murder and conspiracy.
When they said guilty, it was like oh my goodness, like, thank you.
And at the sentencing hearing, when Ebony's mother makes her impact statement, there isn't a dry eye in the courtroom.
I let them know who they took away from us. I let them know that they weren't God, that wasn't their job. That is the worst kind of evil.
The judge makes sure they'll never see the outside of prison walls again.
They're sentenced to life in prison without parole.
But Ebony's family doesn't get the peace they expected.
Still feels like pointless. It still feels like I was robbed.
We can't see Ed. We gotta go to a gravesite and talk to her.
You still have your life. You still get to see your family, even if it's behind bars.
It's just not fair. I don't think I believe in justice anymore.
To this day, Terrence Marche remains missing.
His whereabouts continue to be unknown.
Terrence Marche, go to hell, if you're not already there.
The senseless crime of these three men ruined the lives of many people. But most of all, Ebony's daughter.
It breaks my heart when I see her isolate sometimes because she missed her mom. You know, I try to comfort her the best way I can. But I know sometimes that's not good enough. I know sometimes she just wants her mother arms around her. But I believe she's going to be very well empowered for her future. She has a village, and she has a whole lot of her mother in her.
A mother whose time on earth will never be forgotten.
I want people to know how loving and caring she was, how compassionate and fun she was.
Ebony was the sweetest, kindest person you would know.
I just feel blessed and honored that I got to know her. I take such pride in the fact that she was my sister. Oh, I wish everybody got to feel how it felt to be loved by Ebony. Her life is so important, and I just want people to understand that. Her name will live in our hearts and our lives forever.
The Big Island of Hawaii is a landscape defined by dramatic contrasts, a place where profound natural beauty intersects with the raw, unpredictable power of the earth. Along the Hamakua coast, the scenery is dominated by towering, emerald green cliffs, cascading waterfalls that carve their way through ancient rock, and dense, impenetrable rainforests. Tucked away within this rugged terrain is Waipio Valley, often referred to as the Valley of the Kings. It is a location of deep historical and cultural significance, a place that feels entirely removed from the relentless pace of the modern world. At the edge of this isolated valley lies a vast stretch of coastline, meeting the deep, churning waters of the Pacific Ocean. The beach here is not made of the fine, white powder found in typical tropical postcards. Instead, it is composed of stark, black sand. This dark earth is born from violence, the geological result of superheated volcanic lava violently colliding with freezing ocean waters, shattering instantly into millions of tiny, obsidian-like fragments that are eventually ground down and washed ashore by the tides. It is a landscape that commands absolute awe and respect, a place where humanity feels small and temporary. People journey to this specific, hard-to-reach coastline to disconnect, to seek solitude, and to stand in the presence of untouched nature. But on a Tuesday afternoon in the late spring of 1999, that beautiful, dark sand was not just a geological marvel. It was a shallow, temporary grave, hiding a terrible secret from the world above. Nature is entirely indifferent to human tragedy. It does not pause its cycles, it does not weep for the lost, and it certainly does not offer up its secrets willingly. The wind continues to howl through the steep walls of the valley, the ocean tides continue their endless rhythm of advancing and retreating, and the earth simply absorbs whatever is placed within it. On the Big Island, this natural indifference is magnified by the sheer, aggressive power of the coastal environment. The tropical climate, the relentless moisture, the highly corrosive salt in the air, and the constantly shifting sands create conditions that are incredibly hostile to preservation. It is a place that erases traces of human existence with terrifying efficiency. For someone looking to hide a monstrous act, this isolation and environmental hostility might seem like the absolute perfect conditions. Burying a secret in the shifting sands of a remote, difficult-to-access valley is a calculated gamble. It is a bet that the ocean will eventually take the evidence, or that the earth will simply swallow it whole, leaving absolutely nothing behind but quiet rumors and slowly fading memories. On the afternoon of June 1st, 1999, that dark gamble failed, though only by a remarkably narrow margin. The day likely began like any other in the Hamakua coast region. The afternoon sun would have been beating down, casting sharp, distinct shadows against the towering cliffs of Waipio Valley. It was a time of day when the tropical heat is palpable, and the beach is often visited by a sparse number of locals and travelers looking to experience the profound, quiet isolation of the area. At approximately 2:47 in the afternoon, a group of beachgoers was walking casually along the black sand. In a place as visually overwhelming as Waipio, the human eye is naturally drawn outward, toward the vast horizon where the dark ocean meets the sky, or upward, toward the sheer, majestic green walls of the valley. But on this specific afternoon, their attention was drawn sharply downward, to the ground directly beneath their feet. As they walked, they noticed a distinct, unsettling anomaly in the terrain. A beach is a landscape largely defined by its smoothness, carved by wind and water into gentle, rolling dunes and flat, rhythmic expanses. Any sudden disruption in this natural pattern stands out glaringly to the observant eye. There was an area of sand that simply looked wrong. It was disturbed, irregular, a chaotic and uneven patch in an otherwise uniform landscape. In such isolated places, curiosity often gives way very quickly to a creeping, cold sense of unease. As the beachgoers approached the disturbed patch of dark earth to investigate, the stark, horrifying reality of the situation came into agonizing focus. Protruding visibly from the dark, volcanic sand was a portion of human remains. The psychological shock of such a discovery cannot be adequately overstated. One moment, you are standing in what is widely considered one of the most beautiful, untouched natural environments on the planet, listening to the soothing sound of the waves. The next moment, the illusion of a pristine, safe paradise shatters entirely, instantly replaced by the grim, undeniable evidence of human mortality and violence. The contrast is deeply jarring and profoundly traumatic. The black sand, a symbol of ancient natural beauty, suddenly transforms into an active crime scene, a hiding place for something deeply sinister. Thrust unexpectedly into a waking nightmare, the beachgoers immediately retreated from the disturbed earth and frantically contacted the authorities, setting in motion an incredibly complex investigation that would end up spanning decades. The response from the Hawaii Police Department was swift, but the logistical challenges of the location were immediately and painfully apparent. Waipio Valley is not a place that is easily accessible by standard vehicles. The road leading down into the valley is notoriously steep, narrow, and treacherous, requiring specialized four-wheel drive vehicles and a steady nerve to navigate safely. When patrol officers and criminal investigators finally arrived at the Black Sand Beach, they were met with a scene that was both deeply tragic and highly complex from a forensic standpoint. Securing a crime scene in a public, outdoor, coastal environment is universally considered an investigator's worst nightmare. There are no walls to lock, no doors to seal off, and no way to control the environment. The scene is completely exposed to the elements. The wind can easily blow away microscopic trace evidence. The salty, humid air rapidly degrades organic material, and there is the ever-present, ticking clock of the incoming tide that could wash the entire scene away into the ocean. Officers quickly established a wide perimeter, cordoning off the area of disturbed sand with yellow tape that fluttered violently in the coastal breeze. They stood guard over the remote stretch of coastline as the meticulous, agonizingly slow process of excavation began. Removing a body from a clandestine grave, especially one buried in loose, shifting sand, is a highly delicate operation. Every single scoop of earth must be monitored, every layer carefully documented for potential clues. As the hours passed and the afternoon sun began its descent, casting long, dark shadows across the valley floor, the full, grim extent of the tragedy was unearthed. The body pulled from the black sand was in a state of severe, advanced decomposition. This was clearly not a recent death. Whoever this person was, they had been lying beneath the surface of the beach for a significant amount of time, silently decaying in the dark while visitors walked nearby, entirely unaware of the horror buried just inches below their feet. The severe state of the remains communicated two immediate, highly frustrating facts to the investigators. First, identifying the victim would not be a simple matter of visual recognition. The harsh elements and the passage of time had stolen the victim's face, reducing them to an anonymous tragedy. Second, determining the exact cause of death would be incredibly difficult. The natural biological breakdown of the body obscures trauma, hides potential defense wounds, and heavily masks the subtle clues that forensic pathologists rely on to determine exactly how a life was forcibly taken. The body was carefully and respectfully secured, placed into a transport bag, and carried out of the rugged valley, beginning the long, somber journey to the Hilo Medical Center, where science would attempt to speak for the dead. It would take time, meticulous forensic work, and the highly skilled recovery of severely degraded fingerprints to finally give the victim back his name. He was Matthew Joel Peak. He was only 22 years old. A young man with his entire life stretching out ahead of him, he was a resident of the very valley where his body was unceremoniously discarded like refuse. He was a familiar, friendly face in the local community, a young man who navigated the vast island not by owning a car, but by relying on the generosity of strangers and acquaintances, frequently hitchhiking along the winding roads that weave through the Big Island. But the revelation of his identity only served to deepen the complex mystery surrounding his demise. Initial examinations at the morgue yielded nothing but profound frustration for the medical examiner. There were no obvious, glaring signs of physical trauma. No gunshot wounds were found in the remaining tissue. No stab wounds could be identified on the body. The weapon, if there was one, left no explicit mark that could survive the severe decomposition process. The case was initially and cautiously classified as a coroner's inquest, a standard medical and legal inquiry into a death of unknown, suspicious causes. It was a highly anxious waiting game, a period of profound uncertainty for the community and for the frustrated investigators. But forensic science, though sometimes agonizingly slow, is incredibly thorough. After weeks of supplementary testing and exhaustive, microscopic analysis, the medical examiner delivered a definitive, chilling conclusion on August 2nd, 1999. Matthew Joel Peak did not die of natural causes. He did not succumb to an unfortunate accident while hiking the rugged terrain. He died of asphyxia. The official, unshakable ruling was death by homicidal violence. Someone had deliberately, physically stolen the breath from a 22-year-old man, violently extinguished his life, and callously buried him in the dark sands of his home. With that official ruling, the entire nature of the investigation fundamentally shifted. It was no longer a question of how he died, but a desperate hunt to find out who killed him and why. The Hawaii Police Department immediately launched a full-scale homicide investigation, seeking to meticulously retrace Matthew's final days, to track his hitchhiking movements across the island, and to identify the last person to look him in the eye before he was murdered. But the trail was already devastatingly cold. The weeks that had passed between his actual death, the delayed discovery of his body on the beach, and the final conclusive autopsy results had given his killer a massive, almost insurmountable head start. More than 25 years have passed since that grim discovery on the black sand beach. A quarter of a century is a massive expanse of time. It is enough time for an entire generation to grow up, for physical landscapes to shift and change, and for crucial memories to fade into the fog of the past. Yet, the case of Matthew Joel Peak remains a gaping, painful wound in the history of the Big Island. It stands as one of the most infamous, unsolved murders in the region. There have been no direct witnesses who have bravely come forward. There have been no suspects publicly identified or named by law enforcement. There have been no arrests, no tense trials, and absolutely no justice for Matthew. In the year 2024, marking a grim 25-year milestone, the Hawaii Police Department deliberately brought case file F-96184 back into the glaring public eye. They released it prominently into their cold case files, serving as a stark, uncompromising reminder that the investigation is not closed, not suspended, and certainly not forgotten by those sworn to solve it. The authorities continue to carry the heavy burden of this unsolved mystery, maintaining firmly that the file remains open and active. They hold onto the steadfast belief that someone, somewhere on the island or beyond, knows exactly what happened in the crucial days leading up to June 1st, 1999. They know from experience that allegiances change over decades, that the heavy, suffocating burden of a guilty conscience can eventually force a confession, or that a seemingly insignificant piece of information held by a silent bystander could be the exact puzzle piece needed to finally shatter 25 years of deafening silence. This is not just a procedural story about a body found buried on a beach. It is a deeply human story about the devastating vulnerability of youth, the absolute cruelty of an unknown assailant, and the haunting, unacceptable reality of a killer walking free for decades. It is a dark journey into the shadows of a tropical paradise, a careful examination of a brutal act hidden beneath the earth. The black sand of Waipio Valley surrendered Matthew Peak's body a long time ago, but it has yet to surrender the truth. To understand the tragedy that befell Matthew Joel Peak, one must first deeply understand the world he inhabited, a world that is fundamentally different from the conventional landscapes most people navigate daily. Matthew is 22 years old, an age universally defined by the pursuit of independence, self-discovery, and the boundless energy of early adulthood. But rather than seeking out the crowded, neon-lit streets of a bustling metropolis, Matthew chose to anchor his life in Waipio Valley. To call Waipio Valley merely a residential area is a vast understatement. It is a profound geographical anomaly, a deep, plunging scar carved into the northeastern coast of the Big Island of Hawaii. Surrounded by cliff walls that soar thousands of feet into the sky, draped in dense, verdant rainforest vegetation, the valley floor is a place where modern time seems to dramatically slow down, if not stop entirely. Living in this valley in the late 1990s was a deliberate choice to step away from the relentless conveniences of mainstream society. The residents of Waipio constituted a tight-knit, fiercely independent community, a rugged collective of individuals who respected the land and embraced the harsh, untamed realities of off-the-grid living. It was not a place for the faint of heart. The environment demanded resilience, adaptability, and a deep appreciation for isolation. There were no neatly paved suburban roads, no vast commercial shopping centers, and no easy amenities. Instead, there were rutted dirt paths, unpredictable river crossings, and the constant, overwhelming presence of nature. Matthew belonged to this unique ecosystem. At 22, he was fully integrated into the rhythm of the valley, a familiar and recognizable figure among the small population that called this majestic, isolated fortress their home. He was known for being deeply connected to the local environment, a young man who navigated the challenges of the valley with the quiet confidence of someone who had found his rightful place in the world. However, living in Waipio Valley also presented severe logistical challenges, the most prominent being transportation. The steep, narrow access road leading into and out of the valley is notorious across the state. It is a treacherous, winding path with an incredibly sharp gradient, requiring highly capable four-wheel drive vehicles and experienced drivers to negotiate its perilous turns safely. For a 22-year-old living an alternative, deeply natural lifestyle, acquiring and maintaining such a specific and expensive type of vehicle was often entirely out of reach. And indeed, according to the records meticulously gathered by investigators, Matthew Peak did not own a car. He did not possess the luxury of turning a key in an ignition whenever he needed to leave the secluded sanctuary of the valley. To access the outside world, to purchase supplies, to seek employment opportunities, or simply to socialize beyond the towering green walls of his home, Matthew had to rely entirely on alternative means of transportation. He became a commuter of the island, but not in any traditional sense. His primary method of traversing the vast, sprawling geography of the Big Island was hitchhiking. In the contemporary era, the concept of hitchhiking is often viewed through a lens of extreme caution, heavily colored by decades of cautionary tales, true crime documentaries, and a general societal shift toward heightened personal security. Standing on the side of a road and soliciting a ride from a complete stranger is now widely considered a highly dangerous, desperate act. But in 1999, on the Big Island of Hawaii, the cultural perception of hitchhiking was remarkably different. It was not an anomaly. It was an established, widely accepted, and completely normalized mode of transportation, especially among the younger demographic and those living in the more rural, alternative communities. The island is geographically massive, the largest in the Hawaiian archipelago, with long, winding highways connecting disparate towns and remote districts. Public transportation was limited, and the socioeconomic realities meant that many locals and transient residents simply did not have access to personal vehicles. Consequently, a unique social contract existed on the island's roads. Hitchhiking was an integral part of the community fabric. It was a system built entirely on mutual trust and the laid-back, accommodating spirit that characterizes much of rural Hawaiian culture. Drivers, often driving pickup trucks or older sedans, would routinely pull over to offer a ride to someone walking along the highway, recognizing a shared struggle against the vast distances of the island. It was a way to share resources, to hear a news story, or simply to help a neighbor in need. Matthew was a master of this informal transit system. He was known to hitchhike extensively, casting a wide net across the eastern and southern portions of the island. His routes were not random. They formed a distinct triangle of movement that defined his daily existence. He would frequently journey from the deep isolation of his home in Waipio Valley, standing on the shoulder of the Hamakua coast highways, waiting for a sympathetic driver heading south. His travels regularly took him to Hilo, the largest town on the island's eastern side. Hilo was a bustling hub of commerce and social interaction, a stark contrast to the silent cliffs of Waipio. It was a place where Matthew could gather supplies, connect with a broader network of friends, and engage with the bustling local economy. But his journeys did not stop there. He was also a frequent visitor to the Puna district, located further south of Hilo. Puna is a vast, deeply forested region known for its alternative communities, its raw volcanic landscapes, and a population that deeply values countercultural, off-the-grid lifestyles, much like Waipio but on a broader, more accessible scale. Because of his constant movement between these three distinct regions, Matthew was not an invisible transient. He was a highly visible, recognized participant in the daily flow of island life. He cultivated a broad network of acquaintances, striking up conversations in the cabs of pickup trucks, sharing rides with locals heading to the markets in Hilo, or exchanging stories with fellow travelers journeying down to the dense jungles of Puna. He knew the rhythms of the roads, the best spots to catch a ride, and the unspoken etiquette of being a good passenger. This extensive network of casual relationships and familiar faces is a crucial element in understanding the tragic circumstances of his death. Matthew was not a stranger lost in a hostile land. He was a young man moving confidently through his own community, relying on a system of trust that had always served him well. Yet, it is precisely this reliance on hitchhiking that exposes the profound, deeply unsettling vulnerability at the core of Matthew's lifestyle. While the culture of the Big Island in the late 90s may have been more accommodating to hitchhikers, the fundamental, undeniable mechanics of the act remain inherently risky. Hitchhiking requires a person to surrender all control over their immediate environment. When Matthew extended his thumb and climbed into a vehicle, he was making a series of immense, unstated assumptions. He assumed the driver was sober. He assumed the driver was stable. He assumed that the person behind the wheel had no malicious intent. For a brief period, whether it was a 10-minute drive down the coast or an hour-long journey through the twisting roads of the Puna district, he was entirely at the mercy of the driver. He was confined within a moving metal box, isolated from the outside world, traveling along roads that frequently cut through dense, uninhabited stretches of rainforest and desolate volcanic fields. This inherent vulnerability is the dark, silent shadow that follows every hitchhiker. You are stepping into someone else's territory, abandoning the safety of the open road for the confined, unpredictable space of a stranger's vehicle. Furthermore, the very nature of hitchhiking means that these interactions are completely unrecorded. There are no passenger manifests, no digital footprints, no ticket stubs to prove who picked whom up, where they went, or what was discussed during the journey. It is an entirely ephemeral transaction, existing only in the fleeting memories of the two people in the car. If one of those people harbors a dark, violent intent, the other is placed in a terrifyingly disadvantageous position, isolated and undocumented. As investigators would later piece together the fragments of Matthew's life, this reality became the central, agonizing focus of their inquiry. The very lifestyle that granted him freedom and connected him to the vast beauty of the island was also the mechanism that ultimately placed him in the path of a killer. He was a friendly, recognizable 22-year-old man who trusted his community enough to get into their cars. He navigated the roads between Waipio, Hilo, and Puna with the ease of a local who believed he was safe in his own backyard. But on a fateful day in the late spring of 1999, that trust was fatally weaponized against him. The vibrant, independent life he had built in the deep valleys and along the winding coastal roads was abruptly and violently extinguished. The network of acquaintances he had built through his travels offered no protection, and the vast, beautiful landscapes he loved provided only a silent, indifferent hiding place for his remains. The deeply unsettling truth that hangs over his story is that the person who took his life could have been a complete stranger passing through the island, or, far more chillingly, it could have been someone he recognized, a familiar face who offered him a ride, a smile, and a false sense of security before committing an act of unspeakable violence. The progression of time on the Big Island of Hawaii often feels distinctly different from the rest of the modern world, possessing a languid, unhurried rhythm that is dictated entirely by the natural environment rather than the ticking of a clock. This phenomenon is profoundly magnified within the steep, enclosing walls of Waipio Valley, where the dense canopy of the rainforest and the rhythmic, thunderous crashing of the Pacific Ocean against the black sand beach create an atmosphere of profound, almost prehistoric isolation. On the afternoon of June 1st, 1999, the valley was bathed in the heavy, humid warmth characteristic of a late tropical spring, an environment that typically invites deep relaxation and a profound disconnection from the anxieties of civilized life. Visitors and local residents alike journey to this specific stretch of coastline to immerse themselves in its untouched majesty, walking along the dark, volcanic shoreline where the immense power of the earth is visibly recorded in every grain of sand. However, the profound tranquility of this isolated paradise was destined to be violently shattered on this particular Tuesday, transforming a site of natural wonder into the focal point of a grim, complex, and deeply unsettling murder investigation that would haunt the community for decades. At precisely 2:47 in the afternoon, a group of individuals walking casually along the expanse of the black sand beach experienced a horrifying disruption of their peaceful excursion, an event that would irrevocably alter the trajectory of the island's law enforcement history. As these beachgoers navigated the uneven, shifting terrain of the shoreline, their attention was unexpectedly drawn away from the majestic, towering green cliffs and the vast expanse of the dark ocean, pulled downward toward a highly irregular, deeply disturbing anomaly situated in the sand directly in their path. The natural, rhythmic patterns of the beach, sculpted continuously by the relentless action of the coastal winds and the retreating tides, had been clearly and deliberately disturbed in this specific location. Instead of the smooth, rolling dunes characteristic of the untouched shoreline, there was a chaotic, uneven depression in the dark earth, a glaring physical inconsistency that immediately triggered a deep, primal sense of unease. Human beings possess an inherent, evolutionary instinct to recognize when an environment has been artificially manipulated, and the disturbed patch of sand on the Waipio Valley beach stood out with terrifying clarity against the uniform backdrop of the natural landscape. Driven by a combination of morbid curiosity and a creeping, icy dread, the individuals approached the disrupted area to investigate the cause of the unusual geological formation, completely unaware of the gruesome reality waiting just beneath the surface. As they drew closer, the horrifying truth of the situation crystallized with devastating suddenness, replacing the tranquil atmosphere of the tropical afternoon with an overwhelming surge of panic and revulsion. Protruding visibly from the dark, shifting grains of the volcanic sand was a distinct portion of human remains, a stark, undeniable confirmation that the disturbed earth was not a natural occurrence, but a hastily constructed, shallow grave designed to conceal a terrible atrocity. The psychological impact of such a visceral discovery is immediate and profoundly traumatizing, instantly shattering the comforting illusion of safety and injecting a dose of pure, unadulterated horror into the mundane reality of a leisurely afternoon walk. Confronted with the undeniable evidence of mortality and malicious intent, the beachgoers recoiled in absolute terror, their peaceful sanctuary instantly transformed into a macabre crime scene contaminated by the lingering presence of a violent death. Recognizing the immense gravity of their gruesome discovery, the group immediately retreated from the immediate vicinity of the grave and scrambled to contact the authorities. A frantic transmission of information that would quickly mobilize the full investigative resources of the Hawaii Police Department. Receiving the distressing dispatch regarding human remains located in one of the most remote and geographically challenging areas of the island presented an immediate, monumental logistical hurdle for the responding patrol officers and criminal investigators. Accessing the floor of Waipio Valley is a notoriously difficult undertaking, requiring the navigation of a terrifyingly steep, incredibly narrow, and deeply rutted access road that features a staggering 25% average grade. Standard police cruisers are entirely incapable of traversing this treacherous descent, forcing the investigative team to rely on specialized, heavy-duty four-wheel drive vehicles to safely transport their personnel and delicate forensic equipment down the massive cliff face. This grueling, slow-moving journey down into the valley significantly delayed their arrival at the shoreline, adding a layer of intense, agonizing pressure to a situation that was already fraught with extreme urgency and environmental complications. Upon finally reaching the expanse of the black sand beach, the law enforcement personnel were immediately confronted with the daunting reality of attempting to secure a highly compromised, completely exposed outdoor crime scene situated in a hostile, unforgiving coastal environment. Unlike a murder committed within the controlled, enclosed confines of a residential building, a clandestine grave located on a public beach is subjected to a constant, aggressive barrage of destructive natural forces that threaten to obliterate delicate physical evidence. The relentless, highly corrosive salty wind whipping off the Pacific Ocean acts as an abrasive force, scattering microscopic trace elements, while the porous, shifting nature of the volcanic sand makes it incredibly difficult to isolate and preserve footprints or other physical impressions left behind by the perpetrator. Furthermore, the investigators were acutely aware of the ever-present, ticking clock imposed by the approaching tide, recognizing that a sudden surge of the powerful ocean could easily wash the entire burial site away, permanently erasing any remaining clues and potentially taking the victim's body out to sea. Moving with urgent, highly coordinated precision, the patrol officers swiftly established a wide, heavily restricted perimeter around the disturbed patch of sand, utilizing bright yellow crime scene tape to physically isolate the area and prevent any further contamination by curious onlookers or the frantic movements of the initial discoverers. With the site superficially secured against unauthorized human intrusion, the criminal investigators initiated the grueling, meticulously slow process of excavating the shallow grave, an operation that required extreme patience, immense physical endurance, and absolute focus. Removing a decomposing body from a sandy environment is a highly delicate, complex forensic procedure, as the loose, unstable earth constantly threatens to collapse inward, potentially crushing fragile bone structures or burying crucial pieces of evidence that might have been interred alongside the victim. The investigators were forced to abandon standard shovels in favor of small, precise hand tools and brushes, painstakingly scraping away the dark, volcanic grains layer by agonizing layer, completely exposed to the relentless heat of the descending afternoon sun. As the excavation progressed over the course of several tense, exhausting hours, the full, tragic extent of the hidden atrocity was slowly and methodically revealed to the surrounding team, confirming their darkest initial suspicions regarding the nature of the burial. The body that was eventually unearthed from the deep, dark sand was not the victim of a recent, accidental drowning or a suddenly fatal medical emergency that had occurred earlier that same day. Instead, the investigators observed with grim professional detachment that the human remains were already in a state of severe, highly advanced decomposition, a biological reality that communicated a crucial, deeply frustrating piece of temporal information to the forensic team. The profound level of tissue degradation clearly indicated that the individual had not been killed hours or even days prior to the grim discovery, but had actually succumbed to their horrific fate a significantly long time ago, lying silently decaying in the cold, wet earth while the world above continued entirely oblivious to the tragedy. This advanced state of decay presented a massive, immediate obstacle for the investigation, as the natural biological breakdown of the body effectively destroys the vital, superficial forensic clues that medical examiners typically rely upon to quickly determine the exact mechanism of death and the identity of the deceased. The harsh, unforgiving coastal elements, combined with the extended duration of the subterranean interment, had thoroughly ravaged the victim's physical features, rendering any attempt at a quick, visual identification completely and utterly impossible. The person pulled from the black sand had been stripped of their individual identity by the cruel passage of time, reduced to an anonymous, tragic figure demanding meticulous scientific intervention to reclaim their name and the story of their final, violent moments. Recognizing that nothing more could be achieved at the heavily compromised beach location, the investigative team carefully and respectfully secured the fragile, decomposing remains, transferring them into a heavy, reinforced transport bag to protect them from any further environmental degradation during the difficult extraction process. The deeply somber, physically demanding task of transporting the heavy remains back up the treacherous, winding cliff road marked the solemn conclusion of the initial field recovery operation, leaving behind a heavily scarred patch of black sand that would forever be associated with an unsolved tragedy. The police vehicles slowly ascended the towering green walls of Waipio Valley, carrying the silent victim away from the isolated paradise where their life had been violently extinguished, beginning the long, grim journey toward the sprawling complex of the Hilo Medical Center. It was within the sterile, brightly lit confines of the medical examiner's morgue that the true, arduous battle for answers would officially commence, transferring the immense burden of the complex investigation from the physically exhausted field officers directly to the highly specialized, meticulous hands of the forensic pathologists, representing the absolute best, and perhaps only, hope of extracting the undeniable truth from a physical body that had been so severely and unfairly subjected to the devastating, relentless ravages of time, the corrosive salt air, and the unforgiving, destructive nature of the Hawaiian coastal elements. The arrival of the heavily degraded remains at the sterile, brightly lit facilities of the Hilo Medical Center marked the beginning of a highly complex and deeply frustrating scientific endeavor to extract answers from a body that had been severely ravaged by time and the unforgiving coastal elements. The foremost and most pressing challenge facing the forensic pathology team was the fundamental establishment of the victim's identity, a task that had been rendered exceptionally difficult by the advanced state of decomposition. As investigators had immediately noted upon the initial excavation on the black sand beach, visual identification was entirely out of the realm of possibility, as the harsh environmental conditions of the shallow grave had completely erased the unique physical facial characteristics of the deceased. In circumstances where visual recognition is completely compromised, forensic specialists are forced to rely on more resilient biological markers, pivoting their focus entirely toward the highly specialized discipline of latent fingerprint recovery from deceased individuals. This process, particularly when dealing with tissues that have been subjected to prolonged moisture and decomposition in a sandy environment, requires an extraordinary level of patience, chemical expertise, and delicate manual dexterity. The skin on the fingertips must often be carefully reconditioned, chemically treated, or even surgically removed and placed over the gloved finger of a forensic technician to obtain a viable, readable print that can be compared against known databases. Through this agonizingly slow and meticulous scientific process, the experts finally managed to secure a usable set of fingerprints, running them through law enforcement records to definitively shatter the agonizing anonymity of the remains. The cold, objective scientific data yielded a devastatingly tragic result, confirming that the body recovered from the shifting sands of Waipio Valley belonged to 22-year-old Matthew Joel Peak. Establishing his identity, however, only served to instantly multiply the terrifying questions surrounding the circumstances of his demise, as investigators now knew exactly who was lying on the examination table. But they remained entirely in the dark regarding the specific mechanism of his tragic and untimely death. The initial forensic autopsy conducted by the medical examiner immediately descended into a profound and highly discouraging state of medical ambiguity, failing to yield any immediate, glaringly obvious clues regarding how the young man's life had been extinguished. The severe, advanced biological breakdown of the body effectively masked the vital physical evidence that pathologists typically rely upon to construct a definitive narrative of a fatal event. The meticulous examination of the skeletal structure and remaining tissue revealed absolutely no evidence of gunshot wounds, completely ruling out the use of firearms in the immediate commission of the crime. Furthermore, there were no identifiable stab wounds, lacerations, or distinct markers of massive blunt force trauma that were capable of surviving the extensive decomposition process intact. In the total absence of any visible, overt signs of a deadly weapon or a fatal physical struggle, the medical examiner was forced into a position of profound scientific caution, officially categorizing the tragic case as a coroner's inquest. A coroner's inquest is a specific legal and medical designation utilized when a death is sudden, entirely unexplained, and highly suspicious, but lacks the immediate, definitive physical evidence required to conclusively rule it a homicide. This temporary classification plunged the investigation into a deeply anxious, paralyzing state of limbo, forcing law enforcement officials to essentially pause their aggressive pursuit of a killer while they desperately waited for the results of extensive, highly complex supplementary forensic testing to be completed at off-island laboratories. For weeks, the case file sat in a frustrating state of suspended animation, with detectives completely unable to publicly declare a murder or aggressively narrow down their suspect pool without the absolute, unshakable backing of a definitive medical ruling. The turning point, a moment that fundamentally and permanently altered the entire trajectory of the investigation, finally arrived on August 2, 1999, when the exhaustive supplementary tests concluded and the medical examiner delivered a definitive, chilling final autopsy report. The exhaustive microscopic analysis and specialized toxicological or tissue examinations finally pierced through the obscuring veil of decomposition, revealing the horrifying truth that Matthew Joel Peak had not succumbed to a hidden medical emergency, nor had he been the victim of a tragic, unforeseen accident while navigating the rugged valley terrain. The official, undeniable cause of death was definitively ruled as asphyxia, a medical conclusion that unequivocally proved his life had been violently and deliberately extinguished by another human being. Asphyxiation is an incredibly intimate, profoundly violent method of murder, requiring the perpetrator to maintain continuous, overwhelming physical force to deliberately completely cut off the victim's oxygen supply. A terrifyingly close-quarters act that fundamentally ruled out any possibility of a distant or accidental demise. With the death officially and permanently classified as a homicide resulting from deliberate, malicious physical violence, the Hawaii Police Department immediately pivoted from a cautious, ambiguous death inquiry into a massive, full-scale murder investigation, mobilizing their entire analytical and field resources to hunt down an invisible killer. The investigative strategy immediately shifted toward aggressively attempting to reconstruct the final, unknown days and hours of Matthew's life, a monumental task that required detectives to plunge deeply into the highly transient, unpredictable world of the island's hitchhiking community. Investigators launched desperate, far-reaching efforts to verify the absolute last individuals who had interacted with Matthew, attempting to meticulously map out the various rides he had solicited and the specific vehicles he had entered during his frequent, undocumented travels between the isolated depths of Waipio Valley, the bustling commercial center of Hilo, and the dense, alternative communities scattered throughout the vast Puna district. Detectives relentlessly scoured the island, conducting countless interviews with local residents, transient travelers, and known acquaintances, desperately searching for anyone who might possess even a fragmented memory of seeing the 22-year-old on the side of the highway or conversing with an unknown individual in the days leading up to his disappearance. They rigorously investigated his personal relationships, scrutinizing every known connection to identify any hidden animosities, outstanding financial debts, or intense personal conflicts that could potentially provide a logical, comprehensible motive for such a brutal, calculated execution. However, despite the immense dedication and relentless energy poured into the sweeping investigation, the detectives almost immediately found themselves violently crashing into a series of massive, entirely insurmountable investigative bottlenecks that effectively strangled the progress of the case. The most devastating blow to the inquiry was the total, agonizing lack of any direct, eyewitness testimony, as absolutely no one had stepped forward to report witnessing the murder, the transportation of the body, or the deeply suspicious act of digging a clandestine grave on a public, heavily exposed beach. The killer had operated with terrifying efficiency and absolute secrecy, exploiting the profound isolation of the valley and the blinding cover of darkness, or environmental isolation, to commit the atrocity entirely unobserved by the surrounding community. Furthermore, the harsh, unforgiving nature of the physical crime scene proved to be a catastrophic detriment to the forensic aspect of the investigation, completely failing to provide the vital, microscopic clues necessary to identify a suspect in the modern era of criminal justice. The highly corrosive, aggressive coastal climate, combined with the relentless, abrasive action of the sand and the extensive amount of time that had elapsed between the murder and the discovery of the remains, had thoroughly completely obliterated any potential trace evidence that might have been left behind by the perpetrator. There was absolutely no usable, foreign DNA recovered from the victim's body, no identifiable fibers from a suspect's clothing or vehicle, and no distinct physical impressions left in the shifting earth that could be utilized to conclusively link a specific individual to the horrific crime. Without a murder weapon, without eyewitnesses, and totally lacking any form of concrete, actionable forensic evidence, the police found themselves in an incredibly frustrating, seemingly impossible position, staring at a massive, complex puzzle with the vast majority of its crucial pieces permanently missing. The tragic, undeniable reality facing the law enforcement agencies was that the prolonged delay in discovering the severely decomposed body had effectively gifted the perpetrator a massive, completely unassailable head start, allowing them ample time to destroy any remaining physical evidence, perfect a watertight alibi, or simply flee the jurisdiction of the island entirely. The profound lack of any publicly identified suspects forced the active investigation into a terrifying, demoralizing standstill, trapping the memory of Matthew Joel Peak in a devastating bureaucratic purgatory where justice remained perpetually and agonizingly out of reach. The psychological toll this insurmountable wall of silence took on the dedicated investigators cannot be overstated. As detectives who had sworn an oath to protect the community and seek justice for the victims of violent crimes found themselves completely paralyzed by the sheer absence of actionable information. Every promising lead they managed to uncover through exhaustive community interviews inevitably disintegrated into a frustrating dead end. Every whispered rumor of suspicious activity ultimately proved to be entirely unsubstantiated by physical facts, and the sprawling, vast geography of the Big Island seemed to mock their desperate efforts to locate a killer who had vanished completely without a single trace. The investigators were acutely aware that the specific nature of the murder, a violent death by asphyxiation followed by a deliberate, calculated burial in a remote location, strongly suggested a deeply personal crime or a shockingly cold, premeditated act of lethal violence. The deeply disturbing reality that the killer possessed the physical strength required to overcome a 22-year-old man, the chilling psychological composure necessary to violently steal his breath, and the logistical foresight to transport and conceal the body in the challenging terrain of Waipio Valley, indicated an incredibly dangerous, highly capable individual operating freely within their jurisdiction. Despite their most relentless, aggressive efforts to shake the trees of the local community and compel those with hidden knowledge to come forward, the protective silence surrounding the murder of Matthew Joel Peak remained utterly impenetrable. A deafening void of information that effectively shielded the perpetrator from the consequences of their monstrous actions. The total failure to identify a single viable suspect, combined with the complete absence of forensic evidence and the profound lack of witnesses, eventually forced the immensely frustrating, agonizingly slow transition of the active homicide investigation into the chilling, inactive status of a cold case, leaving a young man's brutal death completely unresolved and leaving a dangerous, unidentified killer free to walk among the public, entirely unburdened by the heavy chains of justice that they so deeply and undeniably deserved. In the conventional architecture of a true crime narrative, and indeed within the fundamental expectations of a functioning modern society, the discovery of a brutally murdered body is merely the opening sequence that inevitably leads to the structured, procedural theater of the justice system. We are culturally conditioned to anticipate a specific, reassuring sequence of events following a horrific crime, a sequence that restores the delicate balance of societal order. We expect the tireless, relentless pursuit by law enforcement to culminate in the dramatic click of handcuffs, the highly publicized reading of Miranda rights, and the decisive, public identification of a perpetrator. We expect the narrative to transition from the environment of the crime scene to the sterile, formalized setting of a court of law. Within the mahogany-paneled walls of the courtroom, the chaotic violence of the murder is meant to be meticulously dissected, analyzed, and categorized by prosecutors and defense attorneys, ultimately leading to a definitive verdict delivered by a jury of peers and a sentence handed down by a judge. This legal process is designed to provide a tangible, measurable form of closure, a mechanism through which the community can collectively condemn the violent act, officially punish the offender, and offer a semblance of peace and resolution to the grieving family and friends of the victim. However, in the deeply tragic and profoundly frustrating case of Matthew Joel Peak, this entire anticipated structure of justice completely collapsed, utterly failing to materialize in any recognizable form. The reality of case file F-96184 is defined not by the dramatic courtroom clashes or the triumphant delivery of a guilty verdict, but rather by an agonizing, deafening silence and a complete, devastating absence of any judicial proceedings whatsoever. There was absolutely no trial held to determine the guilt or innocence of the individual who violently stole the breath from the 22-year-old victim. There were no aggressive, theatrical cross-examinations of reluctant witnesses, no meticulously constructed forensic presentations designed to sway a captive jury, and absolutely no final, gavel-striking moment of accountability. Instead of a courtroom filled with the palpable tension of impending justice, the aftermath of Matthew's murder was characterized by the sterile, quiet frustration of a police precinct where an investigation had slammed into an immovable, impenetrable wall of dead ends. The suspect board, a crucial physical tool utilized by homicide detectives to map out the complex web of relationships, motives, and potential perpetrators, remained a hauntingly barren, empty space. In a standard murder investigation, this board would be densely populated with photographs of persons of interest, string-connecting alibis, and timelines detailing the movements of various suspects. But in the investigation into the death of Matthew Joel Peak, the authorities possessed a confirmed victim, a definitively established cause of death by deliberate asphyxiation, and a precise geographical location where the remains were concealed. Yet they completely lacked the most critical component of all, a name to attach to the horrific violence. This void of identifiable suspects represents a catastrophic failure of the investigative process, an agonizing reality where the immense, focused energy of the Hawaii Police Department simply had nowhere to direct its forceful momentum. The detectives assigned to the grueling case were forced to grapple with the immense, heavy psychological burden of knowing exactly how a young man was brutally killed in their jurisdiction, while simultaneously confronting the deeply demoralizing fact that they were entirely powerless to hold the responsible party accountable for the atrocity. The transition of a high-priority, heavily resourced active homicide investigation into the stagnant, bureaucratic purgatory of a cold case is not a sudden, dramatic event, but rather a slow, agonizing process of attrition. It is a deeply frustrating degradation of hope, characterized by a gradual decrease in the frequency of incoming tips, the slow exhaustion of all conceivable forensic avenues, and the inevitable reallocation of limited police resources to newer, more immediate acts of violence that demand urgent attention. As the weeks following the grim discovery on the black sand beach slowly turned into months, and the months inevitably bled into years, the thick, detailed case file chronicling Matthew's final days and the gruesome recovery of his severely decomposed body began to gather metaphorical dust in the archives of the police department. The agonizing decision to officially reclassify the investigation as a cold case is never made lightly by law enforcement professionals, as it essentially represents a formal, administrative acknowledgement that the current investigative strategies have entirely failed to produce a viable path forward. It is a profoundly difficult admission of defeat, a concession to the harsh reality that the killer had successfully utilized the extreme isolation of Waipio Valley, the destructive environmental forces of the coastal climate, and the complete absence of human witnesses to execute a perfect, entirely untraceable murder. However, designating a case as cold does not signify that it is officially closed or entirely forgotten. Rather, it indicates that the active, daily pursuit has been suspended, placing the pursuit of justice into a state of indefinite hibernation. Waiting desperately for a miraculous technological breakthrough in forensic science or a sudden, unexpected confession from a guilt-ridden conscience to reignite the extinguished flames of the inquiry. The lack of a trial and the indefinite suspension of the active investigation exact a terrible, enduring psychological toll not only on the dedicated detectives who poured their emotional energy into the dead-end case, but also on the broader community of the Big Island, particularly those residing in the tight-knit, alternative enclaves of Waipio Valley and the vast, sprawling Puna district where Matthew frequently traveled. When a horrific murder occurs and the perpetrator is swiftly removed from society through the justice system, the community is granted permission to begin the difficult process of communal healing. The definitive resolution of the crime restores a critical sense of collective safety, reassuring the public that the violent anomaly has been effectively neutralized and that the established social order remains intact. But when a killer evades detection, slipping silently back into the community without facing any consequences, that essential sense of security is permanently shattered. The knowledge that a highly capable, remorseless individual who possesses the physical strength and chilling psychological composure necessary to strangle a young man to death and bury his body on a public beach is walking freely among them introduces a pervasive, deeply unsettling undercurrent of paranoia into the daily interactions of the island residents. Every stranger offering a ride to a hitchhiker, every unfamiliar vehicle navigating the winding coastal highways, and every unidentifiable face encountered in the dense, isolated regions of the island suddenly becomes a potential source of hidden, lethal danger. The tragedy of Matthew Joel Peak is thus compounded exponentially by the devastating absence of a trial, as the failure of the justice system to secure accountability leaves his memory trapped in a perpetual state of unresolved trauma, denying his loved ones the fundamental human right to understand why he was killed and who was responsible for his brutal demise. The personal nature of his death by asphyxiation makes the lack of judicial resolution even more difficult to reconcile, as it forces those who knew him to constantly confront the agonizing reality that his final moments were spent in desperate, terrifying physical proximity to an assailant who has never been forced to answer for their monstrous actions. The justice system, for all of its intricate legal frameworks and immense investigative resources, is ultimately entirely dependent upon the acquisition of concrete, undeniable evidence to function properly. A vital requirement that the natural environment of the Big Island cruelly and efficiently systematically erased in this particular instance. The corrosive salt air, shifting volcanic sand, and rapid biological decomposition effectively acted as unwitting accomplices, destroying the microscopic clues that would have formed the foundational basis of a successful prosecution. Without that crucial evidentiary foundation, the legal apparatus is completely paralyzed, entirely incapable of initiating the necessary procedures to bring the killer to justice, leaving the terrifying narrative of the crime permanently suspended without a conclusion. As the decades have slowly passed since the summer of 1999, the profound silence emanating from the empty courtroom has only grown louder and more oppressive, serving as a constant, bitter reminder of the immense limitations of human justice when confronted by the vast, indifferent power of nature and the calculated, perfect secrecy of a truly elusive predator. The complete and utter absence of a trial, a verdict, and a sentence means that the case of Matthew Joel Peak remains a gaping, unhealed wound in the historical record of the Hawaii Police Department, a chilling testament to the terrifying reality that it is entirely possible to commit an act of unspeakable, intimate violence, conceal the horrific evidence in a majestic natural landscape, and walk away entirely untouched by the consequences, leaving behind nothing but a tragic, unsolved mystery. An empty suspect board, and a community forever haunted by the unseen, unknown monster who vanished flawlessly into the dark tropical shadows. The passage of 25 years is a monumental, almost incomprehensible span of time when measured against the brevity of a single human life, representing an entire quarter of a century wherein the physical landscape of the world shifts, a new generation is born and reaches adulthood. And the sharp, agonizing edges of immediate trauma slowly dull into a chronic, dull ache of unresolved grief. For the sprawling, diverse communities of the Big Island of Hawaii, and specifically for those who still hold the memory of 22-year-old Matthew Joel Peak in their hearts, the relentless forward march of the calendar offers absolutely no solace, no closure, and no escape from the terrifying reality of what occurred on the 1st of June, 1999. Time possesses a cruel, deeply paradoxical nature within the highly specialized, frustrating realm of cold case homicide investigations, acting simultaneously as the ultimate adversary and the final, desperate beacon of hope for exhausted law enforcement officials. On one hand, time is the great eraser, the merciless force that silently degrades the fragile microscopic fragments of forensic evidence, erodes the clarity of crucial eyewitness memories, and allows a cunning, elusive perpetrator to physically and psychologically distance themselves from the monstrous atrocity they committed in the dark shadows of Waipio Valley. The highly corrosive salt air, the relentlessly shifting volcanic sands, and the immense, indifferent power of the Pacific Ocean have long since scoured the physical crime scene completely clean, permanently removing any lingering, tangible trace of the violent struggle that ultimately extinguished a young man's vibrant life. However, on the other hand, the vast expanse of 25 years also possesses a unique, undeniable power to fundamentally alter the complex human dynamics that often shield a guilty party from facing the severe consequences of their lethal actions. The heavy, suffocating burden of carrying a horrific secret, the terrifying knowledge of having deliberately stolen the breath from another human being, can act as a slow-acting psychological poison, gradually eroding the mental fortitude of a killer or an accomplice over decades of paranoid existence. Allegiances that were forged in the desperate, panic-stricken moments immediately following the brutal murder often inevitably fracture under the immense pressure of time as marriages dissolve, criminal partnerships violently disintegrate, and the powerful bonds of fear that once guaranteed absolute silence begin to weaken and decay. Furthermore, individuals who were intimately aware of the crime but were too terrified of the perpetrator to step forward in 1999 may now find themselves in entirely different, significantly safer life circumstances, or they may be approaching the twilight of their own lives, suddenly compelled by a profound, overwhelming desire to clear their heavily burdened conscience before they pass away. Recognizing this crucial psychological shift and refusing to allow the brutal murder of a helpless 22-year-old victim to simply vanish into the dusty, forgotten archives of local law enforcement history, the Hawaii Police Department made a deliberate, calculated, and highly strategic decision in the year 2024 to thrust case file F96184 back into the glaring, inescapable spotlight of public awareness. Marking the grim, deeply somber 25th anniversary of the tragic discovery on the Black Sand Beach, the authorities officially re-released the comprehensive details of Matthew Peak's unresolved homicide, prominently featuring his enduring mystery within their specialized, highly publicized cold case initiatives. By deliberately shining a powerful light onto this decades-old darkness, the police department was sending a completely uncompromising, aggressively clear, and universally broadcast message to both the general public and the unidentified monster who still walks freely among them. The paramount, overarching objective of this renewed, desperate public appeal was to categorically and permanently dispel any lingering, dangerous assumptions that the exhaustive investigation had been quietly abandoned or administratively closed by a frustrated bureaucracy. The authorities forcefully emphasized, utilizing every available public platform, that the pursuit of Matthew's killer remains an entirely open, highly active, and absolutely unbroken commitment, explicitly stating that the case has never been suspended and continues to receive the focused, dedicated attention of specialized cold case detectives. These seasoned investigators, who have inherited the heavy, agonizing burden of this quarter-century-old puzzle, are operating under the steadfast, unshakable conviction that the essential key to finally unlocking the truth does not reside in a sudden, miraculous technological advancement in forensic science, but rather rests entirely within the guarded minds and fading memories of the local community. They are acutely, painfully aware that even the most seemingly insignificant, incredibly minuscule fragment of information, such as a vague, half-forgotten recollection of a specific, out-of-place vehicle parked near the Waipio Valley Lookout on that fateful late spring afternoon, a bizarre, overheard conversation in a dimly lit Hilo bar regarding a violent physical altercation, or a sudden, completely unexplainable change in the demeanor, residence, or lifestyle of a known acquaintance immediately following the discovery of the severely decomposed remains, could potentially be the exact, critical catalyst required to completely shatter the impenetrable wall of deafening silence that has successfully protected a ruthless murderer for 25 agonizing years. As the island community is once again forced to confront the haunting, deeply unsettling narrative of the young hitchhiker who never returned home, a multitude of profound, terrifying, and fundamentally unanswered questions continue to relentlessly echo through the lush, towering green valleys and along the stark, unforgiving black sand beaches, demanding elusive answers that have completely defied the exhaustive efforts of the justice system. The primary, most agonizing mystery that continues to plague the minds of the investigators centers entirely around the unknown identity of the final individual to physically interact with Matthew before his life was violently and permanently interrupted. Detectives constantly, obsessively ponder whether the friendly, outgoing 22-year-old willingly entered the vehicle of a complete, malicious stranger while attempting to hitchhike along his usual, familiar transit routes, tragically falling prey to a random, opportunistic predator who exploited the inherent, devastating vulnerability of the island's informal transportation network. Conversely, they must also grapple with the equally terrifying, deeply disturbing possibility that Matthew was actually betrayed by a familiar face, a recognizable acquaintance, or even a trusted friend who successfully lured him into a false sense of absolute security before launching a sudden, lethal attack in an isolated environment where no one could hear his desperate pleas for survival. Furthermore, the exact physical sequence of the violent events remains a massive, terrifying blank space in the complex investigative timeline, forcing authorities to continuously question whether the brutal, intimately violent act of asphyxiation was actually committed directly on the beautiful, desolate expanse of the Waipio Valley Beach, or if the deeply unfortunate victim was actually murdered in an entirely different, completely unknown location. The logistical complexity of the latter scenario introduces a highly disturbing element of premeditation and calculated coldness, suggesting that the killer intentionally transported the lifeless body down the notoriously treacherous, incredibly steep, and highly dangerous winding cliff road, specifically choosing the remote, difficult-to-access black sand beach as the perfect, isolated location to callously discard the remains in a shallow, hastily constructed grave. The underlying, driving motive behind this horrific, incredibly personal act of fatal violence remains equally shrouded in absolute, impenetrable darkness, leaving law enforcement professionals, amateur sleuths, and the grieving community to endlessly and fruitlessly speculate regarding the true psychological catalyst for the murder. They question whether the young, unassuming man was simply the tragic, unlucky victim of a sudden, desperate robbery that escalated catastrophically into a fatal physical confrontation, or if he was the specific, intended target of a deeply personal, long-simmering conflict rooted in unknown, hidden animosities, outstanding financial debts, or complex interpersonal disputes. There is also the chilling, pervasive fear that Matthew was simply the tragic prey of a completely random, psychopathic individual operating silently in the shadows of the island's transient community, a predator who killed simply for the terrifying thrill of exerting absolute, lethal control over another human being. The sheer, demanding physical logistics of the crime also raise profound, highly terrifying implications regarding the specific nature and capabilities of the perpetrator, or potentially, the perpetrators. Overcoming a healthy, 22-year-old man, successfully stealing his breath through the application of sustained, overwhelming physical force, and subsequently navigating the massive logistical nightmare of secretly burying a human body in a public, heavily exposed, and environmentally hostile coastal location strongly suggests the very real, terrifying possibility that multiple individuals may have actively participated in the violent execution of the crime, or at the very least, actively conspired in the subsequent, desperate cover-up of the atrocity. The thought of multiple people collectively holding onto such a dark, monstrous secret for 25 years without a single betrayal is a testament to the powerful, silencing grip of shared guilt and profound fear. Ultimately, the enduring, tragic legacy of this massive, unsolved cold case extends far beyond the sterile, bureaucratic confines of police precinct reports, medical examiner autopsies, and forensic pathology records. It serves as a profoundly devastating, deeply emotional reminder of a vibrant, youthful life that was violently, unfairly stolen, and a fundamental societal promise of justice and accountability that remains painfully and visibly unfulfilled. Matthew Joel Peak will forever remain frozen in time as a 22-year-old young man, his vast, unrealized potential permanently extinguished beneath the dark, shifting earth of the very majestic landscape he so deeply loved and called his home. Meanwhile, the terrifying, unacceptable reality persists that the specific individual, or individuals, directly responsible for his brutal, calculating demise has enjoyed 25 long years of completely unearned freedom. The killer has been allowed to continue experiencing the profound beauty of the island, to continue breathing the sweet, humid tropical air, and to continue living a life that they so callously, violently, and permanently denied their helpless victim. As the relentless, powerful ocean waves continue their endless, rhythmic crashing against the majestic, entirely indifferent shores of Waipio Valley, effectively washing away the physical scars of the past, the dedicated authorities of the Hawaii Police Department stubbornly, defiantly refuse to surrender their pursuit to the overwhelming, erosive passage of time. They continue to desperately, urgently plead with the public, urging anyone with even the absolute slightest whisper of knowledge, the tiniest fragment of a memory, or the heaviest burden of a guilty conscience to finally step forward and illuminate the decades of darkness. They hold fiercely onto the unwavering, desperately needed hope that one day, the silent black sand will finally be forced to yield its absolute darkest secret, and the elusive, long-awaited scales of justice will finally, decisively balance for a young man who is tragically, entirely forgotten by the relentless forward march of time, but who remains perfectly, eternally remembered by those who continue the relentless, unyielding pursuit of the ultimate truth. The enduring mystery surrounding the tragic death of 22-year-old Matthew Joel Peak serves as a profound and devastating reminder of the ultimate fragility of human life and the terrifying limitations of the modern criminal justice system when directly confronted with the immense and entirely unforgiving power of the natural world. For more than 25 long years, the sprawling and diverse communities of the Big Island of Hawaii have been continuously forced to grapple with the deeply unsettling and entirely unacceptable reality that a ruthless, highly capable killer successfully executed a brutal murder and subsequently vanished without leaving a single identifiable trace into the dense tropical shadows of the isolated Hamakua coast region. This complete and utter lack of judicial accountability creates a pervasive, heavy atmosphere of psychological unease that continuously ripples through the tight-knit alternative enclaves of Waipio Valley and the vast, densely forested expanses of the remote Puna district where the young victim was once a highly visible, frequently traveling, and friendly presence. When a violent, horrific crime is effectively solved and the responsible individual is officially and permanently removed from the general population through incarceration, the surrounding community is immediately granted the crucial necessary opportunity to begin a complex collective healing process and restore their deeply shattered sense of foundational safety and fundamental trust in their fellow citizens. However, the total catastrophic failure to identify, apprehend, and prosecute the specific person who violently and deliberately stole the breath from a completely helpless young man fundamentally denies this essential healing process entirely, leaving the local residents forever trapped in a perpetual, agonizing state of unresolved grief and lingering communal paranoia. The profound geographical isolation and the breathtaking, overwhelming natural beauty of the ancient Hawaiian landscape are inextricably linked to the horrific circumstances of this specific cold case, creating a deeply jarring, deeply unsettling duality that forces all observers to constantly and painfully reconcile the unparalleled visual majesty of a seemingly perfect tropical paradise with the absolute darkest, most terrifying capacities of human malice and calculated predatory violence. The towering ancient emerald cliffs and the endless rhythmic crashing of the vast, deep Pacific Ocean against the stark, shifting black sand of the desolate shoreline provide a majestically beautiful but ultimately completely cold and indifferent backdrop to a highly intimate and terrifyingly personal act of lethal physical aggression. The deliberate, calculated choice to conceal the severely decomposing human remains beneath the shifting, porous volcanic earth of a remote public beach represents a truly shocking level of logistical premeditation and chilling psychological detachment, heavily suggesting that the unknown perpetrator possessed an intimate, deeply ingrained understanding of the treacherous local valley terrain and a horrifying confidence in their ultimate ability to entirely evade any form of law enforcement detection. The absolutely devastating reality that the heavily degraded physical evidence completely failed to yield any actionable microscopic clues, identifiable foreign genetic material, or distinct physical impressions places an absolutely massive and heavily disproportionate burden upon the inherently fragile mechanisms of human memory and the highly unpredictable nature of personal morality and human conscience. The dedicated, highly trained homicide detectives who are currently actively assigned to the immensely frustrating case file designated as F96184 understand intimately and painfully that the eventual final resolution of this horrific tragedy will almost certainly not originate from a sterile, highly advanced scientific laboratory environment, but rather from a profound dramatic shift in the complex interconnected social dynamics that have successfully shielded the elusive killer for exactly a quarter of a century. These seasoned investigators remain steadfastly and unwaveringly convinced that the vital missing puzzle piece necessary to finally close this investigation is currently locked securely within the guarded mind of a completely silent witness, an incredibly terrified, unwilling accomplice, or a deeply conflicted confidant who has spent the last 2.5 decades carrying an absolutely unbearable and psychologically destructive weight of hidden knowledge. The slow, relentless passage of 25 years represents a massive, monumental temporal expanse that possesses the unique, undeniable capacity to completely and fundamentally alter long-standing personal allegiances, naturally erode the once powerful bonds of intimidation that previously guaranteed absolute silence, and strongly compel aging, physically declining individuals to finally seek a necessary measure of moral absolution by revealing the heavily guarded truth before they inevitably reach the absolute end of their own natural lives. This crucial psychological understanding represents the core foundational strategy behind the highly deliberate and calculated decision by the Hawaii Police Department to aggressively, explicitly, and publicly thrust the heartbreaking, unresolved story of Matthew Joel Peak back into the glaring public consciousness during the highly publicized, incredibly somber 25th anniversary of the grim discovery on the Black Sand Beach. By explicitly and forcefully refusing to allow the brutal, unprovoked asphyxiation of a young, innocent hitchhiker to quietly, peacefully fade into the obscure, forgotten shadows of dusty institutional history, the determined authorities are proactively and aggressively fighting against the cruel, naturally erosive nature of passing time, and the highly dangerous societal tendency to eventually quietly abandon the desperate, complicated pursuit of ultimate justice when repeatedly faced with seemingly insurmountable, deeply frustrating investigative obstacles and a complete lack of viable suspects. The total agonizing absence of any formal structured judicial proceeding such as a highly tense courtroom trial, a definitive carefully considered jury verdict, or a strictly enforced, heavily publicized prison sentence tragically means that the compelling, terrifying narrative of this horrific crime currently exists entirely without a necessary logical concluding chapter to offer peace to the survivors. This frustrating, perpetually unresolved status directly demands that the general public actively assume a highly critical participatory role in the ongoing active investigation, transforming everyday local citizens from entirely passive, uninvolved observers into potential crucial catalysts for long-delayed, desperately needed justice by remaining constantly hypervigilant and deeply observant of any subtle, unexplained behavioral anomalies or sudden, unprompted emotional confessions from older individuals potentially possessing hidden first-hand knowledge of the fatal violent events that occurred in 1999. The sheer devastating, heartbreaking tragedy of a vibrant, energetic 22-year-old man having his entire promising future maliciously and permanently extinguished in such a terrifying, deeply intimate, and violently physical manner is exponentially continuously compounded by the agonizing, deafening silence that continues to stubbornly surround the exact logistical circumstances of his unprovoked death. The deeply frustrating absolute inability of the authorities to definitively and factually answer the most fundamental basic investigative questions regarding exactly who Matthew met in the crucial undocumented days immediately preceding the 1st of June, exactly where the actual fatal physical struggle truly took place before the body was moved, and what specific dark motivations initially drove the unidentified assailant to commit such a monstrous, entirely callous act creates an endless agonizing cycle of painful and completely fruitless speculation for the surviving family and the surrounding tight-knit community. The terrifying, deeply unsettling possibility that the unknown killer was a completely random, opportunistic traveling predator who simply callously exploited the inherent, widely accepted vulnerabilities of the local island transportation and hitchhiking network is just as deeply disturbing and paranoia-inducing as the chilling alternative investigative theory that the young trusting victim was actually fatally violently betrayed by a recognized familiar acquaintance whom he genuinely believed he could safely trust with his personal physical well-being. Both of these completely viable potential analytical scenarios ultimately serve to forcefully underscore the profound inherent fragility of the unspoken social contract that strictly governs casual human interactions in isolated rural environments where the immediate glaring absence of formal protective security structures requires all individuals to rely entirely and unconditionally upon the basic assumed decency and presumed completely nonviolent internal intentions of the various strangers they inevitably encounter while navigating the remote, treacherous, winding highways of the vast, sprawling island landscape. As the unrelenting, unforgiving years continue to aggressively, mercilessly pile upon one another, the fading, precious physical memories of Matthew Joel Peak are tragically and continuously directly threatened by the inevitable natural generational turnover of the local resident population as thousands of new individuals arrive on the island completely, utterly unaware of the dark, violent history silently buried beneath the beautiful black sand they walk upon. It is therefore absolutely critically essential and profoundly important that his given name and the specific horrific objective details of his completely unprovoked slaughter are continuously aggressively repeated and permanently deeply integrated into the collective spoken historical record of the entire region to effectively guarantee and ensure that the heavy societal moral imperative to finally locate his elusive, cowardly murderer is never under any circumstances allowed to simply comfortably and quietly expire. The agonizing daily plight of the dedicated cold case detective is heavily characterized by a relentless, completely unyielding professional commitment to a young victim they have never personally met or known, driven entirely by a profound, deeply ingrained moral obligation to restore a fundamental necessary sense of universal balance to a deeply fractured, completely unfair universe that allowed a killer to escape unseen. These highly trained professionals are frequently forced to constantly stare directly into the terrifying, mocking abyss of an entirely empty, desolate suspect board, repeatedly, endlessly reviewing the exact same, heavily redacted, completely exhausted witness statements and severely scientifically limited autopsy reports, desperately, urgently searching for a single previously overlooked subtle connection or a microscopic logical contradiction that could finally decisively shatter the impenetrable heavy fortress of silence currently surrounding the decades-old violent crime. Fictional realm of popular horror stories or dramatic cinematic thrillers created for pure entertainment. They are sometimes incredibly, alarmingly real and horrifyingly visually mundane individuals who are entirely capable of seamlessly, quietly blending back into the normal, everyday fabric of modern daily society immediately after committing horrific acts of unspeakable, intimate physical violence, leaving absolutely nothing behind in their wake but a completely devastated, grieving, fractured community and a shallow, entirely unmarked temporary grave hidden just beneath the shifting dark earth of a breathtakingly beautiful and entirely naturally indifferent tropical valley. The continuous, aggressive, loud public appeals periodically issued by the heavily burdened local law enforcement agencies ultimately represent a final, desperate, frayed lifeline completely thrown into the vast, dark, completely silent ocean of passing time, hoping desperately against all possible rational odds that someone somewhere will eventually finally possess the immense necessary moral courage to firmly grasp it and speak the hidden truth. They understand completely and absolutely that securing true, meaningful justice in this highly specific and incredibly deeply difficult investigative context is definitively no longer simply about immediately, rapidly securing a straightforward, swift criminal conviction in a court of law, but is instead profoundly and beautifully about finally reclaiming the ultimate, undeniable historical truth and offering a small, incredibly crucial measure of fundamental lasting peace to all those who have silently suffered through an entire grueling quarter-century of absolute terrifying darkness. Until that highly anticipated and desperately profoundly needed moment of sudden factual revelation finally mercifully arrives, the chilling, completely open case of Matthew Joel Peak will permanently, continuously remain a haunting, terrifying, and deeply, incredibly sorrowful dark stain on the otherwise majestic, breathtakingly perfect natural beauty of the entire Hawaiian coastal landscape and its deeply interconnected, resilient community. It will forever continue to serve as a constant, bitter, and entirely inescapable daily reminder that while the immense, powerful physical natural world may eventually effortlessly and completely physically erase the immediate traumatic visual signs of human violence and bodily destruction, the heavy, enduring righteous demands for ultimate moral accountability and true lasting justice will completely, absolutely never be permanently silenced, defeated, or erased by the relentless, completely unforgiving, and entirely indifferent forward march of earthly time. The physical existence of a cold case file is a deeply melancholic reality within the highly structured bureaucratic environment of a modern police department, existing as a massive, bound collection of fading paperwork, increasingly fragile photographs, and desperately compiled forensic reports that collectively represent a monumental failure of the societal justice system. Inside the secure, climate-controlled archives of the Hawaii Police Department, the extensive documentation comprising Case File F-96184 regarding the brutal, unsolved murder of 22-year-old Matthew Joel Peak sits silently on a metal shelf, serving as a permanent, agonizing monument to a vibrant young life that was maliciously extinguished and a dangerous perpetrator who successfully vanished into the tropical ether. Every single page within that heavy binder is thoroughly saturated with the immense, exhausted efforts of highly dedicated investigators who relentlessly poured their professional energy into navigating a complex, deeply frustrating maze of circumstantial dead ends, utterly uncooperative physical evidence, and a deafening, impenetrable wall of community silence. As the relentless forward march of earthly time continuously adds more years to the tragic timeline, the physical paper inevitably begins to yellow, and the ink slowly starts to fade, mirroring the terrifying, deeply unsettling reality that the crucial human memories required to finally solve this horrific crime are also gradually, permanently degrading within the aging minds of the island population. The stark, undeniable contrast between the sterile, stationary nature of the archived police file and the dynamic, continuously moving reality of the outside world creates a profound, deeply disturbing paradox, highlighting the agonizing fact that while the formal investigation remains officially trapped in a state of suspended animation, the individual responsible for the monstrous act of violent asphyxiation has been freely permitted to continue experiencing the vast, beautiful complexities of human existence. This unknown killer, possessing a chilling level of psychological detachment and an alarming capacity for intimate physical violence, has likely spent the past quarter of a century casually observing the breathtaking tropical sunsets, navigating the treacherous, winding coastal highways, and seamlessly participating in the everyday social fabric of the Hawaiian community, completely unburdened by the heavy, righteous chains of legal accountability. The deeply unsettling knowledge that a highly capable, remorseless predator is completely disguised as an ordinary, unassuming citizen walking freely among the innocent public continuously injects a pervasive, highly toxic undercurrent of chronic paranoia into the historically trusting, tight-knit culture of the Big Island, fundamentally altering the way local residents perceive their neighbors, interact with passing transient travelers, and navigate the vast, deeply isolated expanses of their majestic natural environment. The specific, deeply personal methodology of the murder itself further amplifies this lingering, communal terror, as asphyxiation is definitively not a distant, detached method of inflicting lethal harm, but rather a profoundly intimate, terrifyingly close-quarters act of supreme physical domination that requires the assailant to look directly into the desperate, fading eyes of their helpless victim while deliberately stealing their final breaths. This specific choice of violence heavily suggests a killer who is not merely opportunistic, but deeply, psychologically disturbed, completely capable of overwhelming a healthy 22-year-old man and subsequently maintaining the chilling composure necessary to meticulously transport and conceal the lifeless body beneath the shifting, dark volcanic earth of a remote, highly exposed public beach. The sheer logistical complexity required to successfully execute this horrific crime and entirely evade immediate law enforcement detection strongly indicates that the perpetrator possessed an intimate, deeply ingrained familiarity with the treacherous, uneven terrain of Waipio Valley. Recognizing the profound geographical isolation and the relentless, destructive power of the coastal climate as the absolute perfect, indifferent accomplices for a permanent, untraceable burial. The inherent beauty of the Big Island, characterized by its majestic active volcanoes, its sprawling, densely forested valleys, and its deeply spiritually significant coastal waters, is forever paradoxically intertwined with the grim, brutal reality of what occurred on that fateful Tuesday afternoon in the late spring of 1999. For every individual who journeys to the remote edges of the Hamakua coast seeking a profound sense of spiritual renewal, peaceful isolation, and a temporary escape from the overwhelming anxieties of the modern industrialized world, there exists an invisible, lingering ghost of a horrific past that fundamentally challenges the comforting illusion of a perfectly safe, entirely benevolent natural paradise. The terrifying fact that true human evil can successfully operate and remain entirely concealed within such an overwhelmingly beautiful, seemingly pure environment serves as a constant, deeply unsettling reminder of the profound duality of existence, where breathtaking natural majesty and calculated, cold-blooded murder can seamlessly, silently coexist in the exact same geographical location. This complex, deeply disturbing environmental paradox forces the local residents and the dedicated criminal investigators to continuously navigate a highly challenging psychological landscape, constantly fighting against the profound emotional exhaustion that inevitably accompanies a seemingly endless, highly demanding search for a phantom killer who flawlessly executed a terrifying crime and subsequently evaporated completely without leaving a single tangible footprint in the volcanic earth. When innocent, unsuspecting tourists and local residents currently travel down the notoriously steep, highly dangerous access road to experience the profound, untouched natural majesty of the black sand beach, they are entirely, blissfully unaware that they are casually walking upon a heavily traumatized landscape, a beautiful but deeply scarred environment that briefly served as a shallow, temporary grave for a young man who trusted his community completely. The rhythmic, thunderous crashing of the deep Pacific Ocean against the dark shoreline completely drowns out the lingering, silent echoes of the tragedy, while the highly corrosive salt air and the relentless, abrasive action of the wind and shifting sand have long since scoured the physical location completely clean of any microscopic forensic clues, effectively transforming the majestic valley into a silent, impenetrable fortress that stubbornly refuses to surrender its darkest, most terrifying secret. This profound, deeply frustrating environmental indifference forces the dedicated cold case detectives to rely entirely upon the fragile, highly unpredictable human element, placing their ultimate hope in the desperate belief that the immense, suffocating psychological burden of carrying a monstrous secret for 25 years will eventually fundamentally break the mental resolve of the killer or compel a heavily burdened accomplice to finally seek moral absolution. The investigators are acutely, painfully aware that human allegiances are inherently fragile and highly susceptible to the corrosive effects of passing time, recognizing that the powerful bonds of intense fear, misplaced loyalty, or desperate self-preservation that previously guaranteed absolute silence in 1999 may have completely, violently disintegrated over the subsequent decades. Marriages inevitably dissolve, criminal partnerships violently collapse, and aging individuals confronting their own mortality often experience a profound, overwhelming compulsion to entirely clear their heavily burdened conscience, potentially creating a narrow, incredibly vital window of opportunity for the authorities to finally extract the hidden truth and completely shatter the impenetrable wall of silence. It is precisely this deeply ingrained, unshakable belief in the ultimate vulnerability of human secrets that aggressively drives the Hawaii Police Department to continuously, forcefully thrust the deeply tragic narrative of Matthew Joel Peak back into the glaring, inescapable spotlight of public awareness, explicitly utilizing highly publicized case anniversaries and dedicated media outreach initiatives to proactively hunt for the missing puzzle pieces. The authorities are strategically, deliberately sending a universally broadcast, completely uncompromising message to the elusive perpetrator and any individual possessing hidden knowledge, forcefully confirming that the exhaustive pursuit of justice has absolutely never been abandoned, that the active investigation remains completely open, and that the dedicated detectives will never simply allow the horrific, unprovoked murder to quietly fade into institutional obscurity. They are desperately, urgently appealing to the fundamental, underlying moral conscience of the island community, explicitly asking local residents to rigorously search their fading memories for any subtle, seemingly insignificant behavioral anomalies, unexplainable lifestyle changes, or bizarre, contextually inappropriate conversations that occurred during the late spring of 1999, knowing perfectly well that the smallest, most microscopic fragment of contextual information could potentially serve as the exact critical catalyst required to permanently resolve the devastating decades-old mystery. The heartbreaking, entirely unresolved status of this horrific crime permanently denies the grieving family, the surviving friends, and the deeply affected local community the fundamental, essential human right to fully understand the specific circumstances surrounding the violent loss of their loved one, leaving them endlessly, agonizingly trapped in a perpetual cycle of deeply painful speculation and completely unanswerable questions. They are completely, devastatingly deprived of the profound, necessary closure that only a structured, definitive judicial process can provide, entirely missing the highly anticipated, deeply cathartic moment where a judge officially condemns the monstrous actions of the perpetrator and forcefully restores a critical sense of moral balance to a severely fractured, deeply traumatized universe. Instead, they are continuously forced to violently grapple with the deeply unsettling, entirely unacceptable reality that a highly dangerous, remorseless individual successfully committed an act of supreme, calculated violence and subsequently walked away completely untouched by the severe, mandated consequences of the modern legal system, effectively mocking the fundamental societal promise of protection and universal accountability. The profound, lingering tragedy of Matthew Joel Peak therefore extends far beyond the immediate, devastating physical loss of a vibrant young life, transforming into a massive, haunting testament to the terrifying vulnerabilities inherent in the casual, trusting nature of alternative, off-the-grid island lifestyles and the immense, terrifying capabilities of human malice when completely shielded by a vast, indifferent natural wilderness. As the relentless, completely unforgiving calendar inevitably pushes the tragic event further into the distant, foggy past, the profound moral imperative to definitively solve this horrific crime only grows significantly stronger and infinitely more urgent, completely demanding that the surrounding community actively resist the natural, highly dangerous tendency to eventually forget the unseen victims of historical violence. It requires a collective, deeply committed societal effort to ensure that the given name of the young, 22-year-old hitchhiker continues to be spoken out loud, that his tragic, completely unprovoked death is permanently integrated into the enduring cultural memory of the region, and that the heavy, righteous demand for ultimate accountability is never, under any circumstances, allowed to simply expire quietly in the dark. The dedicated law enforcement professionals will continue to endlessly review the fading, fragile paperwork within the massive F96184 case file, completely driven by a profound, deeply ingrained professional duty to aggressively pursue the elusive truth regardless of the immense, deeply frustrating investigative obstacles placed in their path by the passage of time and the highly destructive coastal environment. They will completely refuse to surrender to the deafening silence, continuously holding onto the desperate, entirely necessary hope that the impenetrable darkness surrounding the black sand beach will eventually, finally, be pierced by the sudden, highly anticipated light of a factual revelation, completely ensuring that the elusive scales of justice will finally, decisively balance for a young man who is brutally, unfairly taken from the world, but who perfectly, eternally remains in the determined hearts and relentlessly searching minds of those left behind.